Hello everyone, how's it going? My name is Harry, and today I will be presenting Chapter 9, Organization as Instruments of Domination, from the book Image of Organization. Basically, this chapter examines how organizations control and dominate people both internally and externally. Well, to make it easier to follow, I will slightly reorganize the content of the chapter into four major topics: organization and class, domination and discipline, physical and mental impact, and finally, the global corporate domination. The first topic to focus on is the classes within the organizations. To understand this, it is important to look at how modern organizations were formed, because their origins reveal a lot about their controlling nature. The book talks about the rise of organization is closely connected to the industrialization. Before the Industrial Revolution, most of the work in Great Britain happened in small workshops. They were usually run by merchant craftsmen and arranged by their skill and experiences, with the master at the top, then journeymen and apprentices learning to trade. But after the Industrial Revolution, things changed a lot. Many self-employed people ended up working in the factories and became wage earners. Labor basically turned into something that could be bought and sold. The shift is important because the workshops were pretty flexible. Craftsmen were self-employed. Well, so as long as merchants bought their goods, they could make a living. Factories, on the other hand, were part of the capitalist system, so they need to produce goods as efficiently as possible to keep making the money. Well, that's where management systems come in, to control and supervise the whole production process. Adam Smith's idea of division of labor from the book Wealth of Nations become a key part of the system. A simple example is the assembly line, where each worker only focuses on one small task. But this idea can go beyond just factory work. It also applies to supervisors, managers, and even CEOs. Everyone has their specific role. The setup is very different from the old workshops model. In modern organizations, workers and managers belong to completely different classes, and the gap in between is much wider. What I want to say is the type of division of labor actually creates a class divisions, since people are separate based on their skills and roles. And what this leads to is inequality and imbalance of power and resources. The people at the top earn way much more, enjoy vacations, and live a very good life, while workers at the bottoms are often overworked and underpaid. In many cases, workers are actually who keep the organization running but get the least rewards. For now, let me give you a quick example from Tesla. I want to ask, when you think of Tesla, what comes to your mind? Maybe a futuristic company with shiny self-driving cars, advanced robots, and the CEO of the company, Elon Musk. He is the pioneer of technological innovation and one of the richest people in the world. It is easy to imagine that everyone there must be living a good life. The Musk himself is living a good life, of course. He has a huge amount of wealth, he has a huge influences, and also he get into touch with celebrities and politicians. I put the picture here because the title of the video always make me laugh. It's basically the Donald Trump's granddaughter chats about about the video game Fortnite. I think this picture is pretty ironic, so I just put it on my slides. Okay, now let's move on. What about people at the bottom of this superstar company? Are they also living a good life? Take a story of an 18-year-old woman working at one of the Tesla facilities. At first, she was excited to be part of the company building the future, producing zero-emission EVs and driving innovation. But she quickly realized the reality was far from the dream. Turns out it was the same kind of assembly line work. Low wages, intense workloads, mandatory overtimes, and frequent workplace injuries. This example shows modern organization creates new class divisions where the form may look futuristic, but the structure still reflects the deep inequalities between those at the top and those at the bottom. Okay, that concludes our first topic. Now let's move on to the second topic, domination and discipline. The book suggests that throughout histories, individuals and groups have always found a way to impose their will on others. Well, think about the Asian empires, or even today, many countries are still ruled by dictators. In those situations, an entire nation is under the control of a single person. Well, in modern organizations, there's also a form of domination, but it looks a bit different. Instead of serving emperors or kings, employees now work to serve the interests of the shareholders. So, how is domination actually happen? The book explains that the most obvious form of domination is through direct threats or force. Dictators often use this approach. Throughout history, countless people have been killed or silenced by authoritarian rulers who control through fear, but this is the most extreme force. The book also identifies three other, most suitable types of domination in modern organizations. First, we have charismatic domination. It happens when leaders' power comes from their personal charm, extraordinary qualities, or perceived heroism. People follow because they generally believe the leader's characters or mission, not because of law or traditions. Well, the second one is traditional domination. This is based on long established customs, traditions, and beliefs. People obey because that's how it's always been, not because of formal rules or personal charm. Last but not least, we have rational legal domination. This happens when authority is based on formal rules, laws, and procedures. People obey not the person, but the legal systems, the laws, office, and the bureaucratic structures. Well, today most countries and organizations operate mainly under the rational legal models. But from my perspective, these three forms can exist at the same time in a single country, organization, or even one person's leadership style. I call this the ultimate domination model. I know I made a silly name here, it sounds like a video game, but what I want to say is under this model, a leader first builds a strong personal image to attract followers. Then they create a narrative that aligns their authority with the nation's or organization's traditional values. Finally, they use formal systems and laws to legitimize and reinforce their power. It is a combination of all three. By the way, this is the term I came up on my own, so if you are taking the notes, be very careful with that. Well, finally, I want to explain how domination works specifically in modern organizations using the theory of Michel Foucault. His communication scholars, and his work plays a very important part in communication studies. In one of his books, Discipline and Punish, Foucault argues that discipline is the primary tool of domination in modern societies and organizations. He introduced the idea of dorsal bodies, which is individuals who have been shaped to follow orders, work efficiently, and internalize control. He describes as a kind of political autonomy or mechanisms of power, where authority just forces people to act but shapes their body function, their techniques, speed, and efficiency. Discipline, according to Foucault, increases a capacity for individuals' will also makes them more obedient. In modern organizations, especially companies, efficiency is everything. Discipline ensures that every employee works in a way that serves maximum efficiency. Well, just think about it. When you're at work, you follow company rules, schedules, and procedures. That's not just for fun. It's to make sure you operate in the most efficient way as possible for the organization. And discipline is a tool that ensures control while boosting productivity. Now, let's move on to our third topic, physical and mental impact. For this topic, I will discuss how organizational domination can cause both physical and mental harm to employees. First, many workers are exposed to unsafe working environments and face serious risk of injury. As I mentioned in my previous example of Tesla, some workplaces push their employees beyond safe limits. However, in Western countries, most organizations pay greater attention to safety regulations and are able to prevent major workplace accidents. This is not necessary because they truly value human life, but because human life costs more money in developed economies. I know it sounds dark, but it is true. Stronger labor laws and higher compensation costs make it more expensive for companies to ignore the, ignore the safety procedure. The book also discusses the working conditions in developing countries, where the international corporations often treat employees very differently. While global companies promote their products with slogans about their innovation or sustainability, the real cost is often paid by underpaid and overworked laborers thousands of miles away. Now I want to give you some case example. One of the most well-known example is Nike. In the 1990s, investigators by the New York Times and Human Rights Watch revealed that Nike factories in Indonesia and Vietnam were essentially sweatshops. Workers earned less than $2 a day, faced verbal abuse, and were forced to work long hours in unsafe conditions. Public outrage forced Nike to adopt the code of conduct. But even today, labor watchdogs continue to report the violations across its supply chain. Another example comes from the fast fashion industry, including the brands like H&M and Zara. The companies rely heavily on cheap laborers in Bangladesh and Cambodia. In 2013, the Rana Plaza factory in Bangladesh collapsed, killing more than 1,100 workers. According to the Clean Clothes campaign, most of the victims were young women earning less than $100 a month, while making clothes for Western brands that sell for hundreds of dollars. These are not isolated cases. They reflect a global system that values perfect over the people. Sorry. In many developing countries, workers simply workers simply have no choice. Cheap labor is their only competitive advantage. Some might some folks might blame the local government for not acting, but in reality, those governments have limited power. If they demand better conditions, costs will go up, and corporations will just simply relocate to another country. Well, I want to speak a little bit more based on my personal experience and opinion. Um, what I want to say is every nation seems to go through this painful stage of development. Well, as the book discussed earlier, European workers during the Industrial Revolution also suffered from terrible working conditions. Over time, that suffering created wealth and improving living standards. Unfortunately, the same, the same cycle continues today. Each generation in developing countries sacrifices their will, their youth and health for the economic growth. There seems to be no easy solution for this. Okay, now let's talk about mental stress. Organizations do not only expose their employees to physical risks but also have a major impact on their mental well-being. As mentioned earlier, modern organizations prioritize efficiency above all else. They expect employees to work as hard as possible, often at the expense of work-life balance. The book suggests that people experience stress when their working conditions, job roles, and the quality of work interact with their personality, affecting both their personal and mental health. It introduced the concept of type A personality, describing individuals who are highly ambitious, competitive, achievement-oriented, and driven by the need to control their environment. While these traits may lead to personal success, they also make individuals more vulnerable to stress-related illness. Moreover, type A individuals can create tension among coworkers due to their intense behavior and constant competitiveness. In modern cooperation, this type of personality is often rewarded by despite the potential health risks. These employees are seen as high performers who drive productivities, even though their work habits may lead to burnout and a toxic work culture. Sorry about the earlier slides, but uh, incorporate. But this is the slide what I'm going to be presenting on right now. In corporate environments, constant monitoring through productivity tracking software, open office layout, or digital tools create a sense of being watched at all times. As a result, employees internalize their surveillance and begin to regulate their own behavior to meet the organization expectations. This self-discipline reduces the need of external reinforcement, allowing companies to maintain control efficiently while presenting it as management. Here we can apply Michel Foucault's panopticon theory, which illustrates how power operates through surveillance and self-discipline rather than direct intervene. Again, I personally believe that Foucault theory has a lot of help to this topic, and I have been reading for this book by Foucault for years, and I have only understand a very little. I think Foucault is definitely a great communication scholar, and sometimes his series is very difficult to understand for for undergraduate student who has a very limited academic experiences. Yeah, so that's what I want to say is that the Foucault's work always gave me a hard time at nightmares, or maybe I just dumb. I don't really know. Alright, anyway, let's move on. Uh, the outcome is a culture of workaholism, where people push themselves to constantly perform, conform too regularly to corporate norms and values. Eventually, this leads to chaos, stress, loss of work balance, and declining mental health. In the previous topics, we mainly look like how organizations control people within a company, a business, or even a nation. Finally, we turn our attention to the global scale of discuss how organizations, especially multinational corporations, have become superpowers that transcend national borders and pass control over people in multiple countries. First, when a company goes large enough, it eventually will step into globalization. The, its branches will spread across the world but remain under the command of the corporate headquarters, the top management. The book points out the top management often make decisions based on the overall improvement of the company, and these decisions always tend to override local considerations. As a result, the decisions made by the top management of large corporations are passed down to their local branches, and these branches, due to their influence in local communities, end up reflecting local societies. The book mentions McDonald's and Disney as examples of such corporations have influenced people around the world. More serious issue is that multinational corporations often control amounts of resources, sometimes even a lifeline of entire small nation. Meanwhile, the corporation's home countries, driven by profit and interest of the elites, allow these resources to be distributed in highly unequal ways. The book points out that these global companies can even influence local politics to secure their mo- to secure their own maximum advantage. Well, earlier I discussed how large organizations exploit local workers by forcing them to work in harsh conditions for extremely low wages. This kind of domination, however, can extend beyond the workplace to affect the entire nations. Another example here, 7 years ago in Ontario, Canada, the Six Nations of the Grand River, one of the country's largest First Nation communities, continue to face a severe water crisis, while the company Nestle extracts millions of liters of groundwater daily from their traditional land. Many families live without running water and must rely on public taps or purchase bottled water, or Nestle bottles local spring water from the profit. Despite the opposition from the indigenous leaders, the company has continued pumping, often unexpired, often unexpired government permits, paying the province minimal fees and nothing to the Six Nations themselves. This situation exposed deep environmental racism and inequality as one of the world's wealthiest nations allowed the global corporations to profit from indigenous land where the residents lack access to safe drinking water. Even in a country like Canada, such things can happen. So there's no need to mention the poor third world countries. Well, in the book points out in many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have already become exporters producing the single products, such as food, for larger corporations, even though domestic hunger have not been resolved. These large companies completely control the natural resources and the labor of these countries, which can be seen as the new generation of colonialism. Of course, the book also presents the positive view of the multinational corporations. Well, as I mentioned earlier with the sweatshops, those companies do bring economic development and job positions to poorer countries. Well, it is very complicated, and my perspective is that there's no perfect solution in this world. Often, being under corporate control is unavailable. But we can hope, but what it can do is hope for that these companies uphold higher moral and ethical standards to actually find better ways to make the things more ethical and more peaceful. Alright, so we already went through the four major topics of today. So let's review. Chapter 9 explores how organizations control and maintain power over individuals and societies. The rise of industrialization transformed the independent craftsman into wage laborers, creating the class divisions between managers and workers. This shift prioritized efficiency and profit, leading the economic inequality. Seen today in companies like Tesla, where top managements have a huge amount of wealth, while factory workers face low wages and poor conditions. The chapter 9 draws on Max Weber, and I incorporate with Michel Foucault's series to explain how domination operates throughout authority, discipline, and surveillance. Organization shapes docile bodies that internalize the control and conform the strict rule of maximum efficiency. This system harms workers physically through unsafe labors in industrials like Nike's factory, and mentally through stress, burnout, and monetary. On a global scale, multinational corporations dominate economics and politics, often exploiting cheap labor and natural resources in developing countries. Cases such as Nestle water extraction from indigenous lands in Canada shows how profit-driving decisions create inequality. When corporates bring jobs and development, their influence represents a modern form of economic colonialism. The chapter concludes that essential the chapter concludes that ethical accountability is important to balance the organization power and human dignity. Alright, so that concludes everything for today. And in the end, I do also have a discussion question for you to think and review. The question is, to what extent do you think the organizational discipline, like rules, surveillance, and performance monitoring, is necessary for efficiency, and where does it cross the line into domination? So you can think about this one question and reflect on the content of the chapter today. And I really want to say I'm very appreciative for you to um, follow my whole process, and pay attention to my presentation. I know, like, I when I was doing presentation, I always make this joke. I always say that I really enjoy to torture my audience with my horrible English. And I hope that I didn't bring too much pain for you today. And again, I truly appreciate for your attention. So yeah, that's we can wrap off and call it a day. And in the end, I will also show my references used in this presentation. So yeah, I thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.